everybody. It's great to be with you. And we will be looking at Rabindranath Tagore and a lot of strange sounding words, a lot of unusual looking images and pictures, immersing ourselves in a culture that is very, very Eastern and very, very different than the Western narrative, the Western meta-narrative as well. I think I told you a story about Fred Craddock a while back when he was preaching one time, and he told a story on himself where he didn't measure up. And he said he left the room where he didn't measure up and didn't really speak forth for somebody who really needed it. And he went out to the curb and he heard the cock crow. And so that's a reference to Peter denying Christ 3 times before the cock crow, which was a reference to that biblical prophecy, if you will, by Jesus. At any rate, so he tells this story, and he goes out and he is preaching, and he tells the story about leaving the room where he betrayed somebody, and he goes outside and hears the cock crow. And somebody said, afterwards during the coffee time, I really enjoyed your sermon, but I didn't get that thing about the cock crowing. What was that all about? Well, that person was not immersed in the Western narrative of literature and religion and the Christian story in any way, shape, or form. This morning, we're going to immerse ourselves in a culture that we have, most of us, I'm going to speak for myself for sure, a little bit for Brent, and maybe some of you, we have very little immersed experience with or familiarity with India and all of its multitudinous beauties and baffling kind of philosophies, etc. But you will see in Rabindranath Tagore a person who reaches out for those common bonds, and he is himself a monotheist and part of a family and part of a movement that leads toward and urges Hinduism itself towards monotheism. And so we're going to see that later on today. He lived 80 years of life from May 7th in 1861 to just at the mid-turning of the 20th century, August the 7th, 1941. Let's talk a little bit about the timeline. He's born in a family he's the youngest of 14 children, and 13 of these children survived. That's pretty unusual for that many children to survive. But this is how talented his siblings were. His father and his grandfather are leaders in Hindu reform movements, as well as the kind of Bengali Renaissance with regard to plays, novels, theater, etc., music composition as well. But one of his brothers, his oldest brother, was a philosopher and a poet. Another brother was the first Indian appointed to the elite and formerly all European Indian civil service. Another brother was a musician, composer, and playwright. And a sister was a novelist. So he comes from an extraordinarily talented family. As I said, he's the youngest of the 14 children, born to Rabindranath Tagore and Sarada Devi, and who, by the way, he's shaped by Brahmonism, which is different than Brahmanism. Brahmanism is pretty ancient, but Brahmoism was in the 19th century into the 20th century, a monotheistic reform of Hinduism. He writes his first poem at the age of 8. He's tutored at school. At the age of 12, he tours India with his father. His mother dies when he's 14. And at that point, by the way, there's some, I should say, video attestations to this, or at least demonstrations of this, that he has a kind of spiritual awakening about God being ever present, available, and one. And that's reinforces his monotheism, if you will. He will write his first unfinished novel when he's 16, and then he writes a book of poems under a pseudonym named Banu Simha, the Sun Lion. And by the way, he spreads kind of a myth that this was a lost poet from the 19th century, and it becomes very popular. But he's 17 years old, and he doesn't believe anybody will really accept him as an author. But he's writing from the very beginning and writing prolifically and well and beautifully. He is a genius, it will turn out. He will be sent off to school to London, but he returns home, kind of drops out. He marries, and then he assumes management of the family's ancestral estate in Bangladesh. And then he will, in the Bengal area, that's Eastern India again, he establishes an ashram, a school, Shanti Niketan, abode of peace. His wife will also die that year. He's about 40 years old now. And later his daughter will die. And 4 years later, his son will die. And he begins to compose songs, which are sung as part of the Indian uprising, trying to be independent. And then his father dies. Well, all that fuels him to publish in Indian, or at least in Hindi, at the age of 49, a first extraordinarily substantial book, small but still thick, called Gintanjali. He will compose a song that later becomes the Indian national anthem. By the way, he also composes a song that becomes another song that becomes the Bangladesh national anthem. In 1912, he sets to translating the original Gintanjali book into English, and he does the translation. And he does about, 2 or 3 of it, and then he finishes it on his way to England, where he will meet with William Butler Yeats, Ezra Pound, just all these great writers. And he gives a copy of the English translation to Yeats. He will be nominated for the Nobel Prize very soon thereafter, and he is awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. He actually receives it in December, but it is announced that he has received it. By the way, I don't know if you know about the Nobel process, but sometimes it takes multiple nominations again and again and again before somebody receives it. He received it on his very first nomination. And he is the first Asian recipient of a Nobel Prize in Literature, first from India, ever. Nobody had ever received it. And this will propel him into worldwide fame. In 1915, he receives knighthood from Great Britain. In 15, he has his first meeting with Gandhi, who's just returned from his sojourn in South Africa. In 1916 to 17, he tours Japan and the United States and makes appeals for world peace and the spiritual unity of all human beings. Then the massacre at Amritsar happens, and that's also depicted in the movie Gandhi in 1919 on April the 13th. And because of that, what the British did at that heinous, horrible scene, he renounces his knighthood on May 30th, 1919. And also he had come to call Gandhi Mahatma, which means in Hindi, great soul. And he says, you are the Mahatma of India. And then he urges, beginning in 1919, Despite all of his differences about non-cooperation and civil disobedience that Gandhi was proposing and leading and enacting, he begins to urge everyone to call Gandhi Mahatma and to recognize him as the great soul, the unifier, the champion, the George Washington, we would say, of the nation of India. He founds a university on the Santiketan campus in 24. He begins painting at the age of, let's see, this is 68. He's 68 years old when he begins his painting career. Good night. He will deliver the lectures at Oxford in 1930 that becomes the book, The Religion of Man. 1930 is a big year for travel. He will travel all over the place and also do that first painting exhibition. By the way, his Nobel Prize winnings, if you will, or the award, the cash award, all of the royalties for his books, and any kind of fees or things that came to the estate or to the family, he donated toward Santiketan and then eventually to the Vishva Bharati University. He even dabbles in filmmaking in 1932, directing his first and only film. In 41, he will dictate on the 30th of July his last poem containing the powerful lines, "The last reward he carries to his treasure house, the unwasting right to peace." And here I'm thinking of Bonhoeffer, who on the day that he was executed said, "This is the end for me. This is the beginning. No, this is the end of life. For me, the beginning of life." Very enigmatic and also very Christian in its orientation. In 47, he dies in Calcutta, in the same house where he was born, in the same neighborhood in the Bengal area of India. His body is cremated and his ashes are scattered in the Ganges. By the way, from the Santiketan Museum, his Nobel Prize will be stolen in 2004. The Nobel Committee will give him 2 replacements, one for his own personal safekeeping and one for the university. They give him one in gold, which is normally, and then they give another one in brass. In 2013, the United Nations honors Tagore for his universal message of harmony as the UN seeks to inspire and expand cross-cultural understanding and mutual respect. And in 2016, the thieves who stole the Nobel Prize are discovered, although the Nobel Prize has never been found, the original one. What makes Rabindranath Tagore so great? Well, he's a polymath genius whose artistic and spiritual endeavors are part of 2 centuries, and they go around the world, all right? He's author of 200 books, novels, short stories, plays, philosophy, social commentary, almost all of which have been translated into English. He's revered even into the 21st century as the greatest literary figure in the history of India. He's a virtuoso pioneer in combining ancient and modern thought from both Eastern and Western traditions. And he's an extraordinarily gifted songwriter. As I said already, a composer of the national anthems for both India and Bangladesh. Next slide. He's a prodigious painter and a founder of the renowned Santiketan Boat of Peace in Bengal. He's a ceaseless traveler. And as seen in the picture in the upper right-hand corner, he'll go anywhere when he's invited. He's always a seeker of new knowledge. And I think finally, and this is most important, he champions service as an essential element for human fulfillment. I slept and I dreamt that life was a joy. I awoke and saw that life was but service. I served and understood that service was joy. You know the old thing, and it's attributed to Abraham Lincoln and a bunch of other people, Charlie Chaplin. God knows who first said it. And they said, I have discovered that the people who are the happiest in life are those who have found a way to serve others. One of the things that my friend Michael Zedek and I often say for people who are experiencing grief is to find something that will benefit another person and do it. Next slide. He's great also because of his writing, and the greatness of his writing compelled the Stockholm Committee to award him the 1913 Nobel Prize for Literature, which was esteemed for its grandness of vision and sympathies for all human existence. Even more than 100 years after its initial publication, it is still revered for its poetic accomplishments and religious profundity. It was said about it, the concept of spirituality expounded in Gitanjali is unmatched for its uniqueness, simplicity, benevolence, and mysticism. We should also, though, say something about Tagore and Gandhi. He met Gandhi after his return from South Africa. They became, although on parallel tracks, they were on the same page. They were on different pages, but they became the two key leaders and two fellow strugglers for India's independence from Great Britain's imperial domination. And in time they became dear friends and intellectual sparring partners. It was Tagore who first called Gandhi Mahatma, and it was Gandhi who called Tagore Gurudev, or Sentinel Master. Gandhi, in one of his fasts in Delhi, I think it was, is really weak. And Tagore hears about it and sends him a communication through a telegraph that he is praying for him, that he's hopeful for him. And then Gandhi had written a letter at the same moment requesting that Tagore send some word that he knows what Gandhi's going through, just so that Gandhi could know that. Because he says, you have been a true friend, Tagore, because you have been an honest, frank friend. You have been absolutely frank with me, and meaning they shared many differences, but that challenging, frank friendship meant the world to Gandhi. His spirituality is shaped by the religion of his grandfather, who is on the left of the upper right-hand picture, and then his father in the far right picture. And Brahmoism is a monotheistic reformist and Renaissance movement in Hinduism. And shaped by that, Tagore would come to these basic principles in his spirituality. No idols. He abhorred all idols. He respects all aspects of nature as manifestations of God's graceful will for the world. You might think here, Wendell Berry, huh? Or Annie Dillard, huh? Or maybe Henry David Thoreau. He embraces, thirdly, righteous acts as the best way to express one's religious convictions. In other words, we need to act our faith and not just say it. The hackneyed way of saying that is we need to walk the walk and not just merely talk the talk. And then finally, he treasured love as the foundation for all goodness, hope, and beauty in the world. Facets of Tagore's faith. He believed in a face-to-faith faith. We are responsible for our daily trek of life on the one hand, and then also we have an ultimate accountability to God. And he prayed this prayer. I think it's very powerful. I'd like to read it out loud. Day after day, O Lord of my life, shall I stand before thee face to face, under thy great sky in solitude and silence with humble heart shall I stand before thee face to face. In this laborious world of thine, tumultuous with toil and with struggle, among hurrying crowds, shall I stand before thee face to face. And when my work shall be done in this world, O King of kings, alone and speechless, shall I stand before thee face to face. In other words, now and in eternity, we always have an opportunity to be face to face with God. Other facets of Tagore's faith, in the next slide, is that he believed God was a poet. God is the master poet. He wrote, my poet's vanity dies in shame before thy sight. This is a prayer, of course. O master poet, I have sat down at thy feet. Only let me make my life simple and straight, like a flute of reed for thee to fill with music. This is a phrase that will come back in the next slide. Where God is, God can be found in the very stuff of everyday life. And he says to the people who love ritual, he says, leave this chanting and singing and telling of beads. Open thine eyes and see. God is there where the tiller is tilling the hard ground and where the pathmaker is breaking stones, with them in sun and in shower, and his garment is covered with dust. Next slide. He believed that you can be filled with fresh life. In the faces of frailties and fragility, God has an infinite capacity to renew human life, to offer enduring, eternal provisions of life and love and grace. This is another prayer of his. Thou hast made me endless, such is thy pleasure. This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life. This little flute of a reed thou hast carried over hills and dales, and hast breathed through its melodies eternally new. At the immortal touch of thy hands, my little heart loses its limits in joy and gives birth to utterance ineffable. The infinite gifts come to me only on these very small hands of mine. Ages pass, and still thou pourest, and still there is room to fill. So that is a take at Rabindranath Tagore. And I should have said this at the beginning, and I'll say it once more before we end. I come of this as an enthusiast, not as an expert on Tagore. I am beginning to be immersed in so much Indian culture, literature, tradition, heritage, but I am open to correction. And if I pronounce especially the language incorrectly, I am deeply regretful and apologize. I have done the best I could to catch the accents and the pronunciation, not just of his name, but of the various places that he founded and that he's associated with, and also that he wrote. But I do apologize because I'm very much a Westerner, but I'm infatuated with Rabindranath Tagore. But I wanted to put that caveat out there to begin.